Thanksgiving afternoon, I showed up at my daughter's house without warning, only to find my grandson sitting on the front steps, teeth chattering in the bitter 15-degree air, dressed in nothing more than a thin t-shirt and shorts. Through the windows, I could see the whole clan gathered around the holiday table, plates piled with turkey, laughter spilling out into the glow of the dining room, while he froze outside like he didn't belong. The sight burned me alive. Fueled by rage and betrayal, I stormed up, kicked open that door, and let 6 words fly that drained the color right out of their faces. But that moment was just the spark, the start of a reckoning that would turn their lives upside down forever. Earlier that day, as I sat in my old Ford, my phone buzzed against the dashboard. A message from my neighbor. Saw police cars at the Trevors again. Domestic issue. Thought of you, knowing your family worries. I stared at the words while the engine idled low. The Trevors. Violet had fretted over their grandson, too, back when she was alive, back when she still had worries of her own. Now it was only me left, and the hollow knot that twisted every time I thought about Jane's marriage. The dashboard clock glowed 2:40 p.m. Time to move. I dropped the shifter into reverse and eased out onto Miller Street, tires crunching over fresh snow. The storm had begun an hour earlier, fat, heavy flakes plastering the roads, making them slick and mean. On the radio, a crackly weather alert faded back into the familiar voice of the same classic rock station Violet and I always tuned into. Led Zeppelin thundered through the speakers, a soundtrack that fit my sour mood. On the seat beside me rested 2 gift bags. One held a brand new leather baseball glove for Julian, more expensive than I wanted to admit. The other carried a stack of comic books, superheroes he'd devoured since he was 12. Now that he was 18, he might have felt too old for them, but I remembered 18. You're never too old to need heroes. Violet used to smile and say, "Family's all we've got," whenever she caught me griping about holiday dinners. She'd been right back then, and she was still right now, though I only heard her voice in memory. It had been 6 months since I buried her, and since then every family gathering felt fragile, like glass you were scared to drop. Snow kept building up on the windshield, wipers slapping to keep pace. Cars around me crept along with hazards flashing like anxious fireflies. I kept a steady 40, both hands on the wheel. No sense rushing if it meant winding up in a ditch. Mile by mile, the Downey exit signs ticked down toward Cincinnati. I tried Jane's number, figuring I'd warn them I was on my way, maybe take some of the surprise out of it. 6 rings, voicemail. Odd. Thanksgiving afternoon, somebody should have been there to pick up. A glowing gas station appeared through the snowfall, its harsh lights cutting through the gray like a lighthouse. I pulled in, topped off the tank, and ducked inside for a steaming coffee and a bag of peppermints Julian always liked. The cashier, a young man with tired eyes, shook his head at the weather. "Roads are getting nasty," he said as he scanned my stuff. "You heading far?" "Cincinnati. Family dinner. Careful out there. Seen 3 wrecks already." Back in the cab, I checked the time, 3:25. On a good day, it was a 45-minute drive. Today it had stretched closer to an hour. I thought of Julian, maybe in the kitchen, maybe watching football with Walter. The kid had shot up since summer when we fished Lake Erie together. He caught his first base that day, grinned so big it was like he'd struck oil. That was also the day I noticed the bruise on his arm. When I asked, he mumbled something about falling off his bike. But I knew better. Those marks were too clean, too much like a handprint. I should have pressed harder. Violet would have. Snow thickened as I took exit 15 and wound through Jane's neighborhood. 2-story homes lined the streets, front doors dressed with pumpkins and wreaths, some houses already strung with Christmas lights glowing faint through the storm. I rolled slow into Maple Grove subdivision, past warm windows where families gathered around their feasts, golden lights spilling onto snow-covered lawns. This was supposed to be a day for healing, for togetherness. Violet would have wanted that. Jane Street came into view. Her blue 2-story stood at the block's end, white shutters bright against the storm. Walter's pickup sat in the drive beside her sedan, smoke curling from the chimney, decorations draped across the porch. It all looked picture-perfect, like nothing could be wrong inside. I slowed as I pulled closer, already imagining the surprise when I knocked. Maybe Julian would run to me, arms out like when he was little. Maybe this would be the Thanksgiving that stitched us back together, just like Violet had always dreamed. I eased into the driveway behind Walter's truck, the Ford's engine ticking as it cooled. Snowflakes swirled in the glow of holiday lights framing the front door. Faint music drifted from inside, warm and inviting, like a Rockwell painting come alive. And then I saw him. Julian sat slumped on the front steps, arms locked around his knees. No jacket, no hat, just a thin shirt and jeans powdered with snow. His body shook, not just from the cold, but from something deeper, something that cut through me. Jesus Christ, I muttered, flinging open the door. The wind hit like a slap, stinging my face with ice. In seconds I was across the drive, watching his lips turn blue, his hands jammed against his chest, desperate to hold on to whatever warmth was left. "Julian," I called, breaking into a run. "What the hell are you doing out here?" He looked up, and the relief in his eyes nearly broke me in half. His face was pale, blotched red where the cold bit deepest. "Grandpa," his voice was barely a whisper, teeth rattling so hard he couldn't finish. I didn't wait. I yanked off my heavy winter coat and wrapped it tight around him before he could get another word out. The boy was frozen through, his whole frame trembling like a leaf caught in a storm. "What do you mean you can't?" "Can't what?" I asked, incredulous. "I helped him up," I said, steadying him when his legs nearly gave out. "How long have you been sitting out here?" I demanded. "I'm not allowed," he answered. He clutched my coat tighter around himself, and I could feel his body trembling through the thick fabric. "I'm not allowed to go in the house," he repeated, as if saying it made it true. Those words landed on me like a physical blow. Through the brightly lit windows behind us I could hear laughter and a television playing. The house glowed with holiday cheer while my grandson sat on the front steps shivering, punished, and ignored. "What do you mean, not allowed?" I said, my voice cutting sharper than I meant as anger started to rise in my chest. "This is your home," I said, and Julian flinched at the tone, so I softened it immediately. The last thing he needed was another adult yelling at him. "Please don't make it worse for me," he whispered, eyes flicking nervously toward the front door. "Please, Grandpa, if Walter hears you," he begged. I looked at the house, really looked at it. The lights, the decorations, the sounds of people celebrating inside. Then I looked at my grandson, his lips blue, his body shaking in clothes that wouldn't keep him warm in 50-degree weather, let alone the near-freezing cold we were in. "How long, Julian?" I asked, my voice gentle but firm. He wouldn't meet my eyes at first. "Since this morning," he stammered. "This morning?" I said, checking my watch. It was a little after 3. "Son, it's below freezing out here," I said, though I stopped before scaring him any more. I tried the front door handle. It was locked, of course. They'd locked him out of his own home on Thanksgiving and left him to freeze while they enjoyed their dinner. "We need to get you warm," I told him, guiding him toward my truck. "Come on, we'll get you in the cab where there's heat." Even as I moved to protect him, my head cataloged small details. The way he flinched at my raised voice, the bruises I'd seen on our fishing trip, the careful, small way he moved like someone who taught himself to be invisible. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. "Julian," I said while helping him into the passenger seat, and I turned the heater all the way up. I wrapped another blanket from my emergency kit around his shoulders and cranked the heat to full blast. His hands were so numb he couldn't hold on to anything, so I cupped them in mine and tried to get warmth back into his fingers. "Talk to me, son," I said, keeping my voice steady even though rage was coiling inside me. "What happened this morning?" I asked. He stared down at his hands, still trembling. "I was helping Mom with the turkey," he said, ashamed and small. "She asked me to check it while she took a shower. I forgot to turn off the oven timer after I took it out to baste it," he admitted in a tiny voice. "You forgot a timer?" I echoed, incredulous. "The turkey got a little burned on top. Not ruined, just darker than usual," he said finally, looking up with fear in his eyes. "Walter came in, saw it, and he lost it," Julian said. My jaw tightened. "Lost it how?" I demanded. "He started yelling that I ruined the whole holiday," Julian said. "He said the guests would think Mom can't cook, that I was an embarrassment to the family." Julian pulled the blanket closer and shivered. "Then he said I had to learn responsibility and that I couldn't come back inside until I'd learned my lesson." "And your mother?" I asked, sharper than I intended. Julian looked away. "She tried to say something at first, but Walter told her to stay out of it," he said. "He said this was between him and me." He swallowed hard. "She didn't say anything after that." I glanced at my watch again, 3:40. Julian, what time did this happen? I asked. Around 11 this morning, he said, 4.5 hours ago. 4.5 hours in weather that could kill someone over a slightly burnt turkey that probably tasted fine. The thought hit me hard. I took several deep breaths so I wouldn't start shouting. Has this happened before? I asked, and the question hung heavy between us. He hesitated, clearly weighing whether to tell me the truth. Sometimes he whispers when I mess up, he said quietly. Last month he made me stand in the garage all night because I forgot to take out the trash. And once he locked me in the basement for 2 days because I accidentally broke one of his beer bottles, he added. Each one of those sentences hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked at my grandson, a smart, kind kid who wouldn't hurt a soul, and I saw how he always seemed to make himself small, like taking up space might get him hurt. Your mother knows about this, he said. She says Walter's trying to teach me discipline, that I need to be more responsible. His voice cracked. Maybe she's right. Maybe I am just. Don't. I cut him off, turning fully in my seat to face him. Don't you dare blame yourself. What that man is doing to you isn't discipline. It's abuse, I told him. And it's going to stop today. Julian's eyes went wide with panic. No, Grandpa, please, he begged. If you make a scene, he'll just take it out on me later. He always does, he said. Through the windshield, I could still see the house, warm and bright, full of laughter and holiday music while my daughter served dinner inside, and her stepson froze on the steps. Listen to me, I said, taking his hands again. You're 18 years old. You don't have to live like this anymore, and I'm not going to let you. But where would I go? I don't have any money. I can't afford college without, he started. You'll come home with me tonight, I decided aloud. We'll figure out the rest later, I added, making the choice real as I spoke. I saw both hope and terror on his face. Hope because someone might finally stand up for him. Terror because he'd learned not to trust that things could actually get better. He won't let me leave, Julian said quietly. He'll call the police, say I stole something, or claim you kidnapped me. I looked at the warm lights and the holiday decorations again and felt something cold and hard settle over my heart. Violet used to smooth things over, the peacekeeper who could calm family fights with patience. But Violet wasn't here anymore, and diplomacy hadn't stopped my grandson from sitting outside for hours in near-freezing weather. Let me worry about Walter, I said as I opened the truck door. Right now, we're going to get your things, I said firmly. I stepped out into the snow, my boots crunching against the hard, fresh layer of white. Behind me, I heard Julian scrambling to follow, still wrapped in my coat like it was his only shield. The front door was locked tight, but I had no plans of knocking. I kept him close to me, and though the cold made my hands tremble, it wasn't just the weather anymore. It was the kind of rage that creeps up slow and then hits all at once, like a freight train. Why didn't you tell me it was this bad? I asked, searching his face. Now that I was really looking, I could see faint bruises along his jawline, half hidden by the shadows and the raw, wind-burned skin. I tried to hint, he whispered, pulling my coat even tighter around himself. But you always talk to Mom, and she. The memory struck me like a slap. Last month, when Julian had called while I was fixing dinner. His voice small, unsure. Grandpa, Walter says I can't eat dinner with him anymore. Says I have to earn my way back to the table. I'd laughed it off back then, thought it was just teenage drama. The next day I called Jane, and she brushed it aside with that practiced ease she'd perfected since marrying Walter. Dad, you're overreacting. It's just normal family discipline. Julian exaggerates everything. You know how teenagers are. Another memory surfaced, a summer phone call. Julian had sounded exhausted. Mom, Walter yelled at me again for leaving dishes in the sink. He made me wash every dish in the house twice. When I'd asked Jane about it later, she'd sighed that martyred sigh of hers. He's just being dramatic. Walter's trying to teach him responsibility. How long has he been treating you like this? I asked now, even though I already knew the answer would tear me apart. Since Mom married him. 3 years ago, Julian murmured, barely audible. It started small, making me redo chores if they weren't perfect. Then it got worse. I remembered our fishing trip this past summer. How Julian had been reluctant to go home, asking if we could stay another day. When I pressed him about it, he only shrugged and said he liked the lake. But now I saw it differently. The silence that fell over him when I mentioned driving back, the shadow that crossed his face when school came up. The basement incident, I said, piecing it together. You mentioned the garage, too. How many times? More than I want to count, he admitted, staring down at his hands, heavy with shame. Last winter, he locked me out for forgetting to shovel the driveway. I slept in your truck when you visited on Christmas Eve. My truck. He'd spent the night in my truck on Christmas Eve while I sat inside sipping eggnog, thinking it was a perfect family holiday. The guilt slammed into me like a physical hit. I looked toward the house, every window glowing with warmth, laughter drifting faintly through the glass. A postcard-perfect suburban holiday, while my grandson nearly froze to death outside. Your mother knows about all of this, I said quietly. Julian nodded miserably. She says Walter's just trying to make me a better person, that I need to toughen up, stop being so sensitive, and learn to follow rules. The anger was boiling in me now, hot, sharp, focused. I felt it in my chest, in the way my vision narrowed. Violet used to warn me about my temper, told me to count to 10 before acting. But Violet wasn't here, and counting wouldn't save my grandson. I stood, keeping Julian bundled in my coat. Come on, we're going inside. Grandpa, no? Please. If you make a scene, he'll just what? I cut in, turning to face him fully. Make you sleep outside in the freezing cold? Beat you? Starve you? My voice was growing harder. Son, it can't get much worse than what's already happening. Julian's eyes flicked toward the front door, fear etched into his face. You don't understand how he gets when someone challenges him, he whispered. But I was already moving toward the house, Julian trailing behind reluctantly. The front door stood there, solid, expensive, Walter's pride in every polished detail of his fortress. I didn't bother knocking. I drove my boot into the door, just beside the lock with every ounce of strength I still carried. 68 years old, but decades of factory work had left me stronger than most men half my age. The wood cracked with a thunderous splinter, and the door flew open, bouncing hard off the wall. Warm air rushed over us, carrying the smell of roasted turkey and the sudden hush of a stunned room. I stepped inside, Julian clinging close, and froze at the sight before me. The dining table looked like something torn from a glossy magazine. White tablecloth, flickering candles, crystal glasses sparkling. Walter sat at the head in a crisp button-down shirt, carving knife in hand. Jane sat beside him in a downy dress I'd never seen before, her hair perfect, every detail polished. Across from them, a little girl, maybe 10, sat with a fork of mashed potatoes frozen halfway to her mouth. The whole room looked stuck mid-motion, like someone had hit pause on their perfect holiday picture. And it hit me like a blow. Here they were, warm, fed, content, while Julian had been shivering outside for more than 4 hours. The turkey on the table was golden and flawless, probably the replacement for the one Julian had supposedly ruined. Everything sparkled, everything was in place, exactly what a family Thanksgiving should look like, except for the cruelty that had left a boy out in the cold. Have you completely lost your minds? My voice thundered across the room. The little girl dropped her fork with a loud clatter. Jane went pale, the serving spoon slipping from her fingers and splattering gravy across the perfect white cloth. Dad, she squeaked. What are you doing here? How did you? While you're sitting here feasting like royalty, that boy was outside freezing. I barked, pointing at Julian wrapped in my coat, still shaking despite the warmth. 4 hours, Jane. 4 hours, and whether that could have killed him. Walter set down his carving knife with deliberate calm and rose from his chair. He looked bigger than I remembered, heavier by at least 50 pounds, but I'd fought men before, and size doesn't always matter when your blood's running hot. Who gave you permission to enter my house? He demanded. His words came out steady but laced with danger, the kind of voice you hear from a man who's not used to being challenged. This is private property. You're trespassing. I could see him sizing me up, trying to decide if he could bully me into backing off. His chest puffed a little, and he started circling the table toward us, moving with that swagger of a man who thinks he owns the ground he walks on. Private property? I stepped right up to meet him. You mean the property where you locked my grandson outside to freeze while you sat in here, stuffing your face with dinner? The younger daughter broke into tears, confused and frightened by the shouting. Jane pulled her close, whispering to comfort her, though her eyes stayed locked on mine. I saw the war inside her, torn between defending her father and protecting her husband. This is a private family matter, Walter snapped, his voice climbing. You've got no business here. No business. My face burned hot with rage. That's my grandson you almost froze to death in the name of your so-called family matter. Behind me, Julian pressed closer, shaking not only from the cold, but from the fear of what was about to happen. I figured this was probably the first time anyone had ever stood up to Walter in his own house, and we all knew it was about to turn ugly. The holiday music still played in the background, a cheery tune about gratitude and togetherness. The cruel irony of it might have been funny if I wasn't so furious I could barely see straight. I pointed at Julian, my fingers steady even though my whole body hummed with rage. Look at him, Walter. Really look at what you've done. Walter crossed his arms and lifted his chin, every bit the picture of a man who thought he was right. The boy ruined our holiday. He needed to learn about responsibility and consequences. A lesson? I could hardly believe my ears. You nearly froze a kid to death over a turkey that got a little burnt. He's 18, not a child. And this is my house, my rules. His voice took on that smug, patronizing tone some men use when they want to sound reasonable. I'm trying to teach him discipline, something his mother clearly failed to do in his first 17 years. Jane winced at that jab, but didn't speak. She just sat there in her downy dress, glancing back and forth like it was a tennis match instead of her own son's future on the line. Discipline. I stepped closer to the table, close enough to see the grease on his plate and the dark red wine stain on his lips. That's called child abuse. And you're lucky I don't call the cops right this second. Child abuse. Walter barked a laugh, cold and sharp, making my skin crawl. He forgot to shut off a timer and ruined a $20 turkey. I sent him outside to think it over. That's not abuse, that's parenting. For 4 hours? In 5-degree weather? My voice shook with disbelief. He's being dramatic, same as always. Walter flicked his hand like he was swatting a fly. Look at him. He's fine. A little cold never hurt anyone. I looked at Julian, still wrapped in my coat, lips blue, body trembling. Fine. This man thought hypothermia was fine. Dad, please. Jane finally spoke up, her voice unsteady. Don't ruin our holiday. We can talk about this later. Ruin your holiday? I turned on her, stunned. Your son was freezing outside while you ate dinner, and you're worried about me ruining your holiday? Her eyes dropped to her plate. She couldn't meet my stare. Walter was just trying to teach Julian responsibility. Sometimes boys need firm guidance. Firm guidance. My voice cracked. Jane, when you were 18 and dented my truck, did I throw you out in a blizzard? When you failed that math test, did I make you sleep in the garage? That's different, she whispered. How? Tell me how it's different. Walter stepped between us, his face flushed red with anger. Because this is my house. And Julian isn't my blood. I have every right to discipline him as I see fit. And there it was, the ugly truth, laid bare. Julian wasn't his son, so Julian didn't matter. To Walter, the boy was just a burden to be controlled and punished. You've got 30 seconds to apologize to my grandson, I said, my voice so quiet it carried more weight than a shout. 30 seconds to show a shred of basic human decency. Walter's laugh came colder than before. I don't owe that boy anything. If he doesn't like my rules, he can find somewhere else to live. The little girl's sobs grew louder. Jane tried to shush her, but I barely heard. All I could see was Walter's smug face. All I could think of was Julian, sitting outside for 4 long hours, convinced he deserved it. Somewhere else to live. I stepped closer, close enough to smell the sour wine on his breath. You're right about that. He is going somewhere else. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone, holding it slow and deliberate so everyone could see exactly what I was about to do. Walter's confidence wavered when his eyes landed on that phone. The smug mask cracked, just a little. You either apologize to my grandson right now, I told him, my voice calm as death, or I call Child Protective Services and report this abuse. You wouldn't dare. He loomed closer, trying to use his size to scare me off. But I'd stared down tougher men than him in my day, and no man who hurt my family was going to make me back down. Try me. I started punching in the first numbers. I've got plenty to tell them about how you left an 18-year-old outside in sub-zero weather for 4 damn hours. Behind me, Julian clutched my arm. He trembled again, not from the cold this time, but from that deep-rooted fear of knowing that standing up usually made things worse. Dad, please. Jane finally moved, stepping between us, her hands raised like she was breaking up a bar fight. Don't destroy our family over this. I'm not destroying anything. My eyes stayed locked on Walter. He did that the second he decided to abuse my grandson. Abuse. Walter sneered, his laugh sharp and bitter. I was teaching him responsibility, something his weak mother never cared to do. Jane flinched as if he'd struck her. She didn't argue, though. She just stood there, swallowing it the way she probably always had. Get out of my house, old man, Walter barked, his voice rising. You don't get to boss people around here. Julian is my responsibility now. And your responsibility? I scanned the immaculate dining room. The crystal, the china, the holiday centerpiece. Then looked back at my grandson's swollen, bruised face. Is that how you teach responsibility? By locking kids out to freeze? The younger daughter's sobs grew louder, lost and frightened by all the yelling. Jane moved in to soothe her, but she kept darting looks between me and Walter like she was watching a tennis match with stakes too high. He's not a child, he's 18, Walter said, squaring his shoulders. And in my house, adults who can't follow simple directions face adult consequences. Adult consequences for forgetting to turn off a timer, he went on. Adult consequences for being careless, destructive, for wrecking our holiday, and embarrassing the family in front of guests. Walter pointed toward the empty chairs where people had clearly been sitting before I showed up. Everyone had been forced to leave because of the scene he made. Staring at those vacant seats, another piece of the puzzle slipped into place for me. They'd had guests, people eating and talking inside, while Julian sat outside freezing, and nobody had questioned it. Nobody had said a single word. Grandpa, let's just go, Julian whispered behind me. Please, I don't want to make things worse. The resignation in his voice tore something in me. This kid, bright, decent, had been ground down so much that he blamed himself for asking for something basic. You're not the problem, son. I said so everyone could hear. You never were. I faced Walter again, my choice hardening inside me like ice. You have 30 seconds to apologize to my grandson for what you did today. I'm not going to apologize for anything, Walter snapped, folding his arms and lifting his chin. And I'm certainly not taking orders from some bitter old man who can't accept that his precious grandson needed discipline. Fine, then we're done here. I shut off the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Julian, grab your things. You're coming home with me. The hush that followed felt huge. Even the little girl paused mid-cry. You can't just take him, Jane whispered. Watch me. I put my hand on Julian's shoulder and steered him away from the table toward the stairs. Go pack what you need. We're leaving. Dad, you can't do this. Jane cried, panic rising in her voice as she followed. You can't just waltz into our house and take my son. I can, and I am, I said, moving to stay between Julian and the rest of the family. Unless you want me to call the police and let them sort it out. Julian led the way up the narrow stairs to the second floor, his steps quick but unsure. I heard Walter's heavy footfalls behind us, but I kept my head down. This is kidnapping, Walter shouted. I'll have you arrested. Good luck explaining to officers why my grandson sat outside in 5-degree weather for 4 hours, I called back. At the top of the stairs, I followed Julian down a short hall to a tiny room at the back of the house. It barely fit a twin bed and a small dresser. There was no visible heat vent, and the single north-facing window let in the coldest air. It felt more like a storage closet than a bedroom. Clearly the worst room in the house. This is where you sleep? I asked, taking in the bare walls and the sparse furniture. Julian nodded and started stuffing clothes into a duffel. Walter says the basement room's for guests and the other upstairs room's for my sister, he said. I noticed he said my sister, not our sister. Even at home, he sounded like an outsider. Take everything that matters to you, I told him, standing guard in the doorway as he packed. We're not coming back for anything. Julian, think about what you're doing, Jane said, appearing at the door with tears streaking down her face. This is your home, your family. Some family, Julian muttered, folding a Dayton University sweatshirt into his bag. Real families don't lock one of their own out to freeze, he added. Walter was trying to teach me responsibility by nearly giving me hypothermia. When Julian looked at his mother, I saw 3 years of hurt and disappointment in his eyes. Mom, he made me sleep in the garage last week because I left a glass in the sink. A glass? That isn't right. Jane's face crumpled. He has high standards. He wants you to be better. He wants me gone, Julian said quietly, zipping his bag. And you know it. We went back downstairs with Walter planted at the bottom like a bouncer. You leave my house, boy, and you don't ever come back. That's fine with me, Julian said, and for the first time that day, I heard real strength in his voice. The front door hung open where I'd kicked it in, cold air pouring in and making the decorations flutter like dying leaves. I could see my truck in the driveway, engine still running, exhaust fogging in the frozen air. Julian, Jane called as we reached the door. Please don't do this. I love you. He stopped and turned once more to look at his mother. If you loved me, Mom, you wouldn't have let this happen. We walked to my truck in silence, our breath steaming in the cold. I tossed his duffel into the bed and helped him into the passenger seat, then climbed into the driver's side. Through the front window, I saw the family still standing in the entryway. Jane crying, Walter flushed with anger, the little girl peeking around the corner. You ready? I asked as I put the truck in reverse. I've been ready for 3 years, Julian replied, pulling my coat tighter around him. I backed out of the driveway onto the street, past other decorated houses where, I figured, normal families were finishing Thanksgiving in peace. The radio played classic rock, the heater hummed, and for the first time since I'd arrived, Julian actually looked like he could breathe. Thank you, Grandpa, he said softly as we turned toward the highway. I can't believe you came for me. You shouldn't have had to wait this long, I said, and I meant every word. I should have seen what was happening sooner, I admitted, my eyes on the road. I tried to warn you, but I didn't know how. We drove in a quiet comfort for a few minutes, the kind of silence that wraps around you like an old quilt, Violet's favorite, the one she always tucked around me on chilly nights. This boy needed protection. He needed a place where he could heal, a safe space to grow into the man he was meant to become. Tell me about college, I said as we merged onto I-75 North. What are you studying? Engineering, he replied, and I noticed his voice grew stronger the more he talked about school. Mechanical engineering, just like I used to do at the factory, I said, thinking of the years Violet and I had worked side by side. Like grandfather, like grandson. I smiled at the thought of Violet, and how proud she would have been. We'll figure out tuition, don't worry about that. Grandpa, I don't want to be a burden, Julian said, hesitating. You're not a burden, son, I told him firmly. You're family, and family takes care of each other. As we neared the house, my driveway looked smaller than usual, both trucks parked side by side. But the house itself glowed with a quiet welcome, and the porch light I'd left on shone like a beacon cutting through the winter darkness. Home sweet home, I said, helping Julian carry his bag to the front door. The key turned easily, and warm air rushed out to greet us as we stepped inside. The house smelled like coffee and the faint trace of Violet's lavender sachets. Modest, sure, a ranch with furniture and carpet showing their age, but it was ours, fully paid for, and filled with memories. You remember where the guest room is? I asked, flipping on the lights as we walked through the living room. Yeah, down the hall next to your room, Julian said, relief clear on his face. It's so warm in here, he added. Thermostat set to 72 year-round. Your grandmother always said life was too short to be cold at home. I guided him to the guest room and helped him settle in. Extra blankets in the closet if you need them, I said. The room was simple but cozy. A double bed covered with one of Violet's quilts, a dresser, a reading chair by the window, and photos of family gatherings, including pictures of Julian at different ages. This had always been his room when he visited. Seeing him here now felt right, in a way that nothing had since Violet passed. I'll start dinner, I said. Nothing fancy, chicken from the freezer and vegetables that need using up. Can I help? He asked, eager to be useful. Sure, but you don't have to. This is your home now, not a job, I reassured him. We moved around the kitchen like family who'd cooked together countless times, and slowly, the tension in Julian's shoulders began to melt away. I thawed the chicken in the microwave while he washed vegetables, our movements falling into an easy rhythm. Tell me more about what's been happening, I said as I seasoned the chicken. Start from the beginning, when your mother married Walter. Julian was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much to share. It started small, little comments about how I loaded the dishwasher wrong or left shoes in the wrong place. Then it got bigger. How much bigger? I asked, bracing myself. He controls everything, Julian whispered. What I eat, when I shower, when I can use the phone. His voice grew smaller as he went on. He made Mom choose between him and me, and she chose him. I froze, hand on the counter. She chose him? What do you mean? Last Christmas, remember when I visited? I stayed quiet at dinner because Walter told me I wasn't allowed to speak unless spoken to. And Mom, she didn't stop him. The memory hit me like a gut punch. I'd assumed Julian was just a moody teen, and even joked with Violet about how kids nowadays didn't know how to hold a conversation. Why doesn't your mother stand up to him? I asked. She's scared, Julian said, chopping carrots with precise, mechanical movements. She told me if she leaves him, she'll lose the house and have to move back to that apartment complex where we used to live. She can't afford to take care of us on her own. I slid the chicken into the oven and started a fire in the living room fireplace. The familiar ritual of crumpling newspaper and stacking kindling gave my mind a small measure of calm. Come sit with me, I said once the fire was crackling steadily. Tell me about the good things, school, your friends. We settled into the chairs by the fire, and for the first time all day, Julian smiled. I made Dean's list last semester, he said. And I have this friend, Jake, teaching me guitar. I pointed to a framed photo of Violet at 20, laughing with an acoustic guitar in hand. She always said music was the language of the soul. I remember her saying that, Julian said, studying the photo. I miss her. Me too, son. Me too. We talked until the chicken was done, sharing memories of Violet and making plans for his spring semester. The house felt alive again, laughter and conversation filling the spaces she once had. As we sat down to our simple meal, I looked across the table at my grandson. Truly looked. The fear was gone from his eyes, replaced with something I hadn't seen in years. Hope. We'll call the college tomorrow, I said, cutting into the chicken. Make sure your financial aid is sorted out, and we'll see about a part-time job if you want one. Grandpa, you don't have to do all this for me. Yes, I do, I said, meeting his eyes. That's what family's for. Just as we were finishing dessert, leftover pie I'd found in the freezer, the phone rang. The sound sliced through our peaceful evening, and Julian tensed immediately. I checked the caller ID and my jaw tightened. Jane. Then came the front door, 3 firm knocks, not a hesitant tap, not a neighborly knock, but the kind that demanded immediate attention. Julian nearly dropped his mug. Grandpa, stay behind me, I said, putting my cup down and stepping toward the door. The knocking came again, louder, joined now by multiple voices outside on the porch. I flipped on the porch light and peered through the peephole. 2 uniformed police officers were standing at my doorstep, and right behind them, like predators waiting for the perfect moment, were Walter and Jane. Mr. Burke, the lead officer called out, his voice steady. Police, we need to speak with you. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and positioned myself so they couldn't see Julian. What can I do for you, officers? I asked. Walter immediately stepped forward, pointing at me with an accusing finger. Officer, this man kidnapped my stepson. He broke into our house and took the boy without permission. The lead officer, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, raised his hand to quiet Walter. Sir, we need to sort this out. Mr. Burke, is there a young man named Julian Downey here? Yes, I said simply. My grandson is here. He kidnapped him. Walter's voice rose dramatically. He broke down our door like a criminal and dragged the boy from his family. Is the young man here voluntarily? The second officer asked, pulling out a notepad. Before I could answer, Julian appeared at my side, still wrapped in the blanket from the couch. His voice was soft but clear. I want to stay with my grandpa. Walter's face turned red. See? He's been filling the boy's head with lies, turning him against his own family. What lies? I stepped forward slightly. The truth about how you left him outside in freezing weather for 4 hours. The truth about the abuse he's endured for 3 years. Abuse. Walter laughed, though the sound was forced. I was teaching him responsibility. He ruined our entire Thanksgiving dinner and needed to learn that actions have consequences. The first officer exchanged a weary look between us, the kind you give when you've broken up too many family fights. Mr. Burke, we're going to need everyone inside so we can discuss this properly. I stepped back reluctantly, letting the officers into my living room. Walter followed immediately, with Jane trailing, her eyes glued to the floor. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, like someone finally realizing the cost of the choices she'd made. Now then, the officer said, taking out his notepad, Let's start from the beginning. Mr. Downey, you claim this man kidnapped your stepson? Absolutely, Walter said, straightening his shoulders and putting on that authoritative, reasonable facade he always used. I came home from work to find my front door broken and Julian gone. When I called around, neighbors said they saw an older man forcing the boy into a truck. Forcing? I couldn't hide my disbelief. Officer, I rescued my grandson from child abuse. That's what he says. Walter shook his head sadly. But the truth is, he's never approved of my marriage to his daughter. He's been waiting for an excuse to cause trouble. The officer turned to Julian, who was standing close enough for me to feel his trembling. Son, did this man force you to come with him? No, sir, Julian whispered. He saved me. Saved you from what? Julian glanced nervously at Walter, then back at the officer. From freezing to death on the front porch. The second officer looked up from his notepad. Explain that. I accidentally burned the turkey this morning, Julian said. Walter made me sit outside in the cold to think about my actions. I was out there for over 4 hours in 5-degree weather. He's exaggerating, Walter cut in quickly. It was maybe an hour, and he was dressed warmly. An hour? I stared at him. Officer, I have witnesses. My grandson was sitting on that porch in a thin shirt and jeans when I arrived at 3:15. He'd been there since 11 in the morning. The first officer looked at Walter with interest. Sir, is it true you made the young man sit outside as punishment? Briefly, yes, Walter said, though his confident front began to crack. But he's making it sound worse than it was. It wasn't freezing for hours. Sometimes teenagers need firm discipline, he added, trying to justify himself. His mother didn't agree to any of this, Julian said, his voice growing stronger. She just didn't stop you. All eyes turned to Jane, silent throughout the confrontation. She stood near the doorway, hands tightly clasped, like she was ready to bolt. Ma'am, the officer prompted gently. What's your version of events? Jane looked like a woman teetering on the edge of a cliff, knowing her next words could either save her or push her over. Her hands shook as she glanced between Walter's expectant gaze and Julian's hopeful eyes. Mrs. Downey, the first officer said softly, we need to know what really happened today. Walter leaned slightly toward his wife, a subtle intimidation in his posture, the way he loomed, and gave her a warning glance. Tell them, honey. Tell them how your father's been turning Julian against us. The officer noticed too. Sir, step back and let your wife speak for herself. Jane's voice came out barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. Julian did burn the turkey this morning. The officer prompted, and Walter's anger was obvious. Jane's eyes flicked to her husband and quickly away. He said Julian needed to learn responsibility by sitting outside in the freezing weather, she admitted, nodding miserably. He said it would teach him to be more careful. How long was he outside, ma'am? The officer asked, glancing at Walter, who stood rigid, barely controlling his anger. Since around 11. Until when? Until my father arrived, she whispered. Around 3:15. The officer did a quick mental calculation. Over 4 hours in 5-degree weather. She's making it sound worse than it was, Walter interjected. He could have come inside any time if he apologized or showed remorse. No, he couldn't, Jane said suddenly, and everyone turned to stare at her. You locked the door. You told me not to let him in, no matter what. The silence that followed was deafening. Walter's face went from white to red, back to white. Jane, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. What are you doing? I'm telling the truth, she said, looking at Julian as tears began forming in her eyes. For once in 3 years, I'm telling the truth. The officer leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Downey, has this kind of punishment happened before? The officer asked. Yes, she said, the words rushing out like they'd been trapped inside her for years. He's made Julian sleep in the garage, in the basement. He's locked him out overnight. Her voice grew stronger with each confession. He controls when Julian eats, when he showers, when he's even allowed to speak at the dinner table. Jane, shut up. Walter's mask finally slipped completely. You have no idea what you're doing. You'll destroy everything we've built. What we've built, she snapped back, her fury sudden and sharp. What have we built except fear and misery? Look at my son. Look what you've done to him. I watched Julian's face change as his mother finally defended him. 3 years of doubt and self-blame seemed to meld away as he realized someone else could finally see the truth of what he'd been through. The first officer stood and moved toward Walter. "Sir, I'm going to need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back." "This is ridiculous," Walter said, backing toward the door. "You're going to arrest me based on the word of a bitter old man and his delusional daughter? Based on physical evidence and multiple corroborating testimonies of child endangerment," the officer said calmly, pulling out his handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." As they read him his rights and led him toward the door, Walter turned to Jane, pure venom in his eyes. "You'll regret this betrayal. You'll lose everything. The house, the money, everything. You'll be nothing without me." "I'd rather be nothing than watch you hurt my son," she said. And for the first time in years, she sounded like the strong woman who had raised Julian on her own. The door closed behind the officers and their prisoner, leaving the three of us alone in my living room. Jane sank into a chair and began to cry. Not the quiet, careful tears of before, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from years of buried pain. Julian went to her immediately, kneeling beside her chair. "Mom, it's okay. It's over now." "I'm so sorry," she whispered through her tears. "I should have protected you. I should have been stronger." "You were strong tonight," I said, settling into my chair by the fireplace. "When it mattered most, you chose your son over your husband. That took real courage." The fire crackled peacefully, and for the first time in months, my house felt like a real home again. Not just because my family was safe, but because the truth had finally been spoken and justice was being served. Julian looked up at me from beside his mother's chair. "What happens now, Grandpa?" "Now we heal," I said simply. "We take our time, and we heal." For months later, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen window. Jane flipped pancakes on the griddle, and Julian sat at the table, staring at his acceptance letter from Ohio State's engineering program. "Full scholarship," he said for the 10th time that week, still barely able to believe it. "They're actually paying me to go to school." "That's what happens when you're brilliant and work hard," Jane said, sliding a stack of pancakes onto his plate. She looked different now, stronger, more confident. The part-time library job had given her independence she'd never had before, and the divorce settlement gave her enough to start over. "Your grandmother would have been so proud," I said, settling into my chair with my coffee. The kitchen felt alive again, full of conversation, laughter, and the comfortable chaos of a real family. Jane had moved in permanently after Walter's conviction. The guest room was hers, and we'd converted the basement into a proper bedroom for Julian. Not a punishment cell like at Walter's house, but a comfortable space with heating and windows that actually opened. "Dad, are you sure you don't mind us staying here indefinitely?" Jane asked, joining us at the table. "I know you're used to your independence." "Independence is overrated," I said, meaning every word. "Family is what matters. Besides, who else is going to make sure Julian doesn't burn down the kitchen when he tries to cook?" "That was just one time," Julian protested, laughing. "And the fire was tiny." The phone rang, and Jane answered. "Burke residence." "Oh, hi, Jake." "Yes, he's here." "Guitar practice at 4? "Sure, I'll tell him." She hung up and turned to us. "Your friend Jake wants to know if you're still planning to practice for the talent show." "The talent show?" I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't tell me about any talent show." Julian grinned, full of the confidence he was meant to have. "It's nothing big. Jake and I are doing an acoustic set, some classic rock songs you'd probably recognize. I promised I'd be in the front row." After breakfast, I found Jane in the living room, carefully arranging new family photos on the mantel alongside the pictures of Violet. There was one from Julian high school graduation that we'd missed because of everything with Walter, another from our fishing trip last month, and one from Christmas morning, our first real family Christmas in years. "Any word from Walter?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. "His lawyer called yesterday," she said, shrugging without much sympathy. "The anger management therapy seems to be going well, but he lost his job at the supermarket. He's moving back to Cleveland to live with his sister." "Good. The farther away, the better," I said. "I feel sorry for him sometimes," she admitted, pausing. "But then I remember what he did to Julian, and the feeling passes pretty quickly." That afternoon, while Julian was at guitar practice, Jane and I worked in the garden, preparing the soil for Violet's vegetable patch. Spring was coming early this year, And there was something quietly hopeful about planting seeds and planning for growth. Dad, Jane said, pulling weeds with determined focus. I need to thank you again for what you did. If you hadn't come that day, you don't need to thank me, I said, turning over a stubborn clump of earth. I was just doing what any grandfather would do. No, you weren't, she said firmly. You risked everything to save him. You could have been arrested, charged with kidnapping. But I wasn't, I said with a small smile. Truth has a way of winning out in the end. She smiled back, wiping dirt from her hands. Violet used to say she was smart, smarter than me, anyway. That evening, we settled into our new routine. Dinner together, followed by whatever game show or movie happened to be on. It wasn't exciting or glamorous, but it was exactly what we needed. Predictable, peaceful, safe. Julian had his guitar out, quietly practicing in the corner, while Jane worked on a crossword puzzle and I read the newspaper. Normal family activities that had seemed impossible just a few months ago. Grandpa, Julian said during a commercial break, I've been thinking about changing my major. From engineering to what? I asked. Social work, maybe counseling, he said, setting down his guitar and looking at me seriously. I want to help other kids who are going through what I went through. I felt a surge of pride so strong it almost took my breath away. This young man, who had every reason to be bitter or angry, wanted to use his experience to help others. That's a fine goal, I said. Your grandmother always said the best way to heal from pain is to help others avoid it. Did she really say that? She did, along with about 1,000 other bits of wisdom I should have listened to more carefully. As the evening wore on and Jane dozed in her chair, Julian and I stepped out onto the back porch to look at the stars. The night was clear and cold, but nothing like that terrible Thanksgiving when I had found him freezing on Walter's doorstep. Ready for fishing season to open? I asked. Can't wait. Think we'll catch anything bigger than last year? With your luck? Probably catch a whale, I said, and we both laughed. We stood in comfortable silence, two generations of Burkes who had found their way back to each other through crisis and truth. In a few months, Julian would head off to college and eventually build his own life and family. But for now, the foundation was solid, built on honesty, protection, and a kind of love that asks for nothing in return. Grandpa, Julian said as we headed back inside, thank you for coming to get me. Thank you for being worth saving. The house was warm and bright as we locked up for the night. Three people who had learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up when it matters most, telling the truth even when it's hard, and protecting the people you love, no matter the cost. Violet would have been proud of all of us. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.